We're doing our comparative law project on the gun control laws between the United States and Japan. I'm Michael Talbert.
I am Gemma Ibet Gutierrez Becerra.
I'm Kaylee Conlon. I'm Jennifer Loya.
I'm Steve Winners.
So to start out, the main 4 points we're going to be talking about today is Japan's federal law, United States federal law, Minnesota state law, and New Jersey state law. So Japan, to start off with their federal law, they have some of the most restrictive gun control laws in the world. The only guns that Japan citizens are allowed to use are shotguns, air guns, and guns used for research or for competition, like trap shooting. And obtaining any type of gun is really, really hard. You have to go through a gun safety class, which has 2 parts of it. One's a written test, and then one's a practical gun use test. And then after that, you must submit a drug test, have a psychological test done, as well as background checks. And those background checks can extend to potential gun owners' family members as well. And then once they do get a purchase, or once they do get a pass on getting a gun, they have to report to the government annually on the gun, and they have to store it properly. So there's 5 chapters to the gun control, or what they call the firearm and sword possession control law in Japan. The first chapter goes over general provisions, which includes the purpose of the law itself. The second chapter contains the obtaining permission to possess a firearm or sword, as well as the rules for firearm and sword instruction, practice, maintenance, and storage. The third rule contains the regulations for antique firearms and swords and the manufacturing of them. The fourth chapter is just full of miscellaneous provisions on temperature, storage of them, record keeping, and like different fees. And then the last chapter sets forth fines and sentences for violations of the law. So I went into the first chapter just to see what the purpose of the law was, and it said this law sets forth safety regulations necessary for the prevention of harm related to the possession and use of firearms and swords. And then I went into the definitions to see what the definitions on firearm and sword were. They defined a firearm as any handgun, military rifle, machine gun, large caliber gun, hunting gun, or any other gun using gunpowder or air rifle. This includes using pressurized gas, which would discharge metal bullets. And then their sword law is a sword is any katana, sword, spear, dagger with a blade length of over 15 centimeters, or any switchblade that opens automatically over 45 degrees. There's 13 exceptions to these laws. I'm not going to go through all of them, but just some of the main points. The first one is anybody who is on duty based on law or ordinance, so pretty much police. Another one is employees of the national or regular public organization for testing or research purposes. It doesn't really say who that means. I can connect that to probably like their military use. And then there's some other ones that go into like ammunition manufacturers. To test, they need the guns in order to test the ammunition. And then that goes in accordance with the firearm, sword, and control law. That goes in accordance with the munition manufacturer law, so those two kind of play hand in hand. And then another big one is the exception for hunters and the hunter, like the instructors for the hunters that teach the courses and improve these hunters to be able to go out and hunt. And just a touch on the history of Japan, or where their law came from. So Japanese firearm and sword control law up until 1993 1993 was kind of vague, and they overhauled it in 93, and then again in 1995 to adapt to the changing demographics of gun confiscations. And then as more people obtained guns in Japan, they had to confront the dangers that the firearms pose to the general public.
Now we're gonna move on to talk about the United States federal laws history. It started like in the 1920s and 30s with the manufacturing, transportation, and sale of alcohol. Like it led to a lot of violence. Uh, it sparked the rise of organized criminal groups illegally manufacture and sell alcohol. So it led to the widespread of gun violence. And so the first federal gun law was in 1927. It banned handguns and other concealable guns from being sold via mail. And then in 1938, it passed a federal firearms act. It required interstate gun sellers to be licensed and keep records of their sales. The act also banned the sale of guns to convicted felons. And the more history. In 1968, the Congress through the Gun Control Act. This was in response to three separate murders. It was the assassination of John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and John F. Kennedy. So this act banned guns from being sold to convicted criminals, drug users, and the mentally ill, and required more licensing for gun dealers. Then the Firearm Owners Protection Act in 1986. This banned the sale of automatic weapons to civilians, but also included some measures designed to aid gun owners. In 1993, Handgun Violence Prevention Act. It required background checks on all individuals attempting to purchase guns from federally licensed sellers. These checks were mandated to take place within 5 days, but then in 1988, the FBI introduced a national instant criminal background check system, which gave federal licensed gun dealers instant access to the criminal history of anyone attempting to buy a gun. The goal of this was to prevent criminals from obtaining any guns. And between the 2000 and 2010, the American public increased. There was a debate over gun control. Between 1993 and 2012, the percentage of Americans who supported gun control over gun rights have dropped from 57% to 47%, according to the Pew Research Center. And immediately after December 2012 killing of 26 school children and teachers in Connecticut, for instance, the percentage of Americans who supported stronger gun control rose only to 51% from 47%. Each incident of mass gun violence into the later 2010s, however, inspired politicians in Congress to call for stronger gun control. Gun control remained a controversial issue in the United States in 2010. Gun control advocates claim restricting access to guns will curb gun violence, so it will lower crime. And supporters of gun rights responded by citing that the Second Amendment protected Americans' the right to bear arms. During President Obama's term, he worked throughout his time in office to pass stronger gun laws. However, most of them failed to pass in Congress. Obama issued several executive orders calling for, among other restrictions, expanded federal background checks for gun buyers.
So that was just a look at both the Minnesota, or not Minnesota, but the United States federal law and Japan federal law. Now we're going to go into the state law. So Minnesota, just to get some definitions out there, they define a handgun as a handgun includes a weapon designed to be fired by the use of a single hand with an overall length of less than 26 inches or having a barrel of less than 18 inches in the case of a shotgun, or having a barrel of less than 16 inches in case of a rifle. When I looked for a definition for semi-automatic, they didn't have a definition, and their definitions listed was literally just a list of automatic weapons. So that could be, I just decided to define semi-automatic as a partially automatic rifle. And then they define a machine gun as a firearm designed to discharge or capable of discharging automatically more than one round in a single trigger function. So in order to purchase a handgun in Minnesota or a semi-automatic military style assault weapon, you have to buy it from a dealer, and then you have to go to that dealer with a handgun transfer permit or a carry permit, which then you have to undergo a 7-day waiting period for the transfer of the report to be filed. And when it comes to possession of a gun in Minnesota, you don't have to have a permit to possess a rifle, a shotgun, or a handgun. And when you actually look at the laws, there's a huge a list of reasons why people cannot possess guns in Minnesota for anything from being under the age of 18 to being convicted of a felony or being charged with a crime of violence. Those all constitute you to not be able to own or carry a gun in Minnesota. When it comes to carrying, the law says that any person carrying a loaded BB gun, rifle, or shotgun on or about the person, not expressly to or from the place where the firearm was bought, sold, traded, displayed, or in the case of hunting, you are otherwise guilty of a gross misdemeanor unless you have a permit to carry. And then in Minnesota, when it comes to machine guns, those are only allowed for police and military use while they are on duty, so they can't use them while they're off duty. Ammunition manufacturers are allowed to have them. A federally licensed dealer is also allowed to have a machine gun. And then the last case would be an antique collection, somebody who collects firearms for a living. They're allowed to have the machine gun, but I don't think they're allowed to actually use it.
And now we are going to talk about another state in the United States, which is New Jersey. New Jersey actually has really strong gun control regulations. The Constitution of New Jersey has no provision explicitly guaranteeing the right of citizens to keep or bear arms. The laws of the state regulate the self-possession and use of firearms and ammunition in the U.S. state of New Jersey. These laws are among the most restrictive in the country. In New Jersey, anyone seeking to purchase firearms is required to obtain a lifetime firearm purchaser identification card for the purchase of rifles and shotguns. So, which is like an FID. It's an ID that they need to go and buy. To purchase a handgun, separate permits needed from the chief police of the place where they live. And New Jersey and other states, including Minnesota, have a waiting period between purchasing a firearm and transferring the item to the gun owner. And the possession to own a handgun, it is unlawful to own a handgun without first having a permit to carry, and it is unlawful to possess any rifle or shotgun without first obtaining the FID. And the steps to obtain these permits are very similar, so I didn't go through each one. It's just like very much the same, so I just included like one for everybody for each permit. To obtain the firearm, the FID card, or the permit to purchase a handgun, you first have to go to the local police and submit an application, which is signed under oath, and it has to be endorsed by three persons that know you, who can know who have each known the applicant for at least 3 years, and certify that the person who is applying is of a good moral character, and must have a justifiable need to obtain the permit. Justifiable need has been defined as an urgent necessity for self-protection, as evidenced by specific threats or specific attacks which demonstrate a special danger to the applicant's life that cannot be avoided by means other than the issuance of a permit to carry a handgun. But police officers, after they are retired, they are most often the ones who get this license. They have to complete a firearm safety training course, not be prohibited by the state or federal law from possessing a weapon. They have to be 18 years old or older. No person may possess, control, own, or purchase any firearm if he has been convicted of aggravated, if he is convicted of something, has ever been committed for a mental disorder to any hospital or mental institution, being convicted for the unlawful use, possession, or sale of a controlled dangerous substance, or is subject to a court order pursuant to the New Jersey law prohibiting the person from possessing any firearm. And there are like the states in yellow are the ones who honors New Jersey permits. So if a New Jersey resident goes to any of these states, they can use the license. But New Jersey doesn't recognize the permit for any other state. And a machine gun, which he was talking about, definition. The possession, purchase, or sale of a machine gun without a license is prohibited. And to obtain this license is like even more hard than the other step. The person has to apply to the judge of the Superior Court where the applicant resides. And no license shall be issued unless applicant will qualify for the other type of licenses. And the court finds that the public safety or welfare is so required. The license is valid for 1 year unless otherwise provided by the court. And the court may also attach such conditions and limitations to the license as it tends to be in the public interest. And last, the assault firearms and magazine capacities. Assault firearm. The New Jersey law restricts the ownership of certain semi-automatic and other firearms based on their military appearance. Specifically, so restricted assault firearms is maintained by the New Jersey State Police. And in New Jersey, it is illegal to possess any magazine that is capable of accepting more than 15 rounds for semi-automatic rifles, pistols, and 6 rounds for semi-automatic shotguns. Police officers may possess these magazines for both personal and official purposes.
Alright, I'm just going to touch a little more on the gun control laws in Japan. Firearms must be stored in police-approved gun lockers, along with having police permission to buy the ammunition. You must inform police of the exact location of the gun and the ammunition. And this is so the police can conduct like safety checks to make sure it's where you say it is. They must retake the gun permit exam every 3 years. The firearm licenses cover two categories: explosive charge guns, which are rifles and shotguns, and then guns that use air pressure to fire projectiles. To own a rifle or a shotgun license, you must be at least 20 years old. Those who want to use air guns must be at least 18. And like Michael previously said, the process is very intense for obtaining a firearm. You have to practice with a police-provided 12-gauge shotgun. And then once the permission is granted, the gun must be purchased from a licensed dealer. The buyer must then take the weapon to the police to show them it is the one that they applied for. Applicants in either category must provide medical proof that they are sound of mind and not addicted to stimulants or other drugs. They must also demonstrate good judgment and physical ability. Those with serious criminal records or history of treatment for mental illness cannot qualify. Gun permits are issued by the National Police Agency through the prefectural public safety commissions. And then anyone seeking to acquire a rifle in principle would have to have owned a shotgun for at least 10 years and fulfill a separate set of requirements and paperwork. Some prefectural police forces are quite strict and rarely issue rifle permits, even if the applicant is qualified. Pistols are not legally available to civilians. For all gun permits, the police carry out thorough background checks on applicants, their families, and their employment records. Any links to desirable or dangerous elements of society results in disqualification. So gun-related accidents. Licensed guns were used to kill 11 people, including 5 suicides in 2011. There are also 28 gun-related accidents, mostly involving hunters. Illegal unlicensed guns, mostly handguns, were used to kill 7 people and injure 11 others last year. The vast majority of these instances related to gang violence. So some history of how guns came to Japan. The first people to land on Japan were 3 Portuguese soldiers. They carried harquebuses. They are a type of firearm similar to a heavy kind of matchlock. Once these people found land, they sought to replenish their ship's larder. And so Lord Tokitaka offered a large sum for these 2 firearms because Japan sought a better defense mechanism than swords. So the Lord asked the swordsmith to forget about swords and focus on replicating the arms that they had just obtained. For the time being, the swordsmith struggled to create the spring mechanism in the weapon they obtained. He got word of an armorer and sought his help. The armorer knew the exact problem, but had to ask his captain if it was all right to tell him what was wrong. And the captain said yes, as long as he could receive the swordsmith's 17-year-old daughter in return. Their commemorative statue of her on the island, which still stands today because they felt she took the sacrifice of the highest order. After this, the swordsmith successfully manufactured 10 firearms in his first year. All right, and then Japan then began to race to arm themselves with something other than swords. So for 200 years, Japan became the lead exporter in arms. This included swords and suits of armor and halberds. This was attributed to low iron and copper costs. The Japanese blades were far sharper than the blades everyone else was manufacturing, and thus made them more desirable. Japanese guns matched those of the Europeans, but they have made a few improvements. They enlarged the caliber to enhance effectiveness, invented a device that enabled the matchlock to be fired in heavy rainfall. They refined the Portuguese firing mechanism by introducing an adjustable trigger pull and a helical mainspring. They made waterproof containers of lacquer for transporting the weapon and its powder. And then they developed a serial volley technique that kept the bullets flying more often. The first step, and so this is hunting laws in Japan. The first step to pass the test for hunting licenses administered by the governor of the prefecture, where one resides, hunting licenses, which are good for 3 years, basically fall into 3 categories: nets, traps, and firearms. Following all the previous laws I spoke of, these are some additional ones for hunting. Any hunting law violator who has been penalized more than a fine must wait 3 years from the day of their suspension to retake the licensing test. The test covers hunting laws, the handling of traps, nets, and firearms, and knowledge of different kinds of game. A score of 70% or above passes. Applicants are also tested on their seeing and hearing abilities and physical fitness. For hunting, a separate gun permit is required, and the range of firearms is limited to shotguns or rifles. The Environment Ministry issues hunting licenses through prefectural governments. This guy named Rick Saka, he's an experienced hunter in both America and Japan, and he says the level of background checks conducted in Japan, it will be considered a violation of privacy here in the U.S. He also talks about how hunters can sell their game in Japan, where this is largely prohibited in the U.S. because of the wealth and desire to ensure stable wildlife populations. And then the prices to obtain permits. So the Hunters Friendship Association runs training programs that cost around 56,000 yen for sample tests and lectures. This includes training on how to use a firearm. There's a further 14,000 yen commission that must be sent in with gun permit application. Then there's the firearm itself, which the association estimates could cost around 45,000 yen minimum. Bullets per rifle run about 80 yen each. The police-approved gun locker costs about 30,000 yen, and approved ammunition locker costs about 10,000 yen, and there are accessories needed to carry and clean the firearms properly, and those cost around another 10,000 yen. So the minimum cost for becoming a gun owner is estimated at 115,000 yen. There is also an additional local government hunt registration fee and a hunting tax that costs around 19,000 yen, and it's only valid in the registered prefecture, though it covers hunting for birds and other animals. The registration fee for basic bird hunting runs about 7,000 yen. So how many hunters and registered firearms are there throughout Japan? As of 2010, about 190,000 people had hunting licenses, of which 122,000 were 60 years or older. As of 2011, police say about 220,000 hunting gun permits were issued, of which 35,000 were rifles. This figure does not include nearly 25,000 air-powered guns, like BB guns, which are also used by hunters. And then what can be hunted in Japan? So the Environment Ministry lists 29 species of birds and 20 species of other animals that can be hunted nationwide. But in reality, what you can hunt depends on the prefecture that you're in. Some species in certain prefectures are not allowed to be hunted or can only be taken in small numbers. Hunters must check with the prefecture under registering so they know what they're allowed to hunt. Species often include wild boar, deer, and bear, as well as birds ranging from pheasants to turtle, doves, and quail. These animals can be hunted from mid-November until mid-February, but this depends on the different prefectures where you register to hunt. Some have longer seasons than others, and all hunters need to confirm the dates of these. Hunting either before daybreak or after sunset is not allowed, nor is hunting close to residential areas. Guns cannot be modified for hunting a certain species.
All right, so now we looked at kind of how these laws are implemented and kind of differences between those in those aspects. But I think it is important to understand not only the how behind the laws, but also the why. So for that, we will go into the perception and rationale behind these laws. So first off, you could say that from these facts, arguments for gun control will say that since Japan has done it, why can't we? And the difference in social ideologies is a very important factor when taking this into consideration. So that the most noticeable difference between these two countries is their social perspectives. Simply put, it is a direct debate between collectivism in Japan and individualism in the United States. So collectivism in Japan. Collectivism is the idea that the overarching group is seen as having a greater priority in terms of its needs over the individuals that make it up. So the people in Japan place more trust in their decisions that the government makes for them compared to like the dissent that we see in the United States. And this is not to say that they are complacent with government decisions that are made, but instead they understand that individual grievances with certain decisions might not be that important when looking at the benefit to their overall group as a whole. So, simply put, it's not seen as being passive. It's more seeing how the overarching group is more important. So they will set aside their personal grievances with that in order for the group to prosper. And individualism in the United States. So individualism is the social practice of placing importance in individual rights and the freedom for someone to make their own decisions. So in the United States, we hold individual rights in very high regard. We value these rights and become defensive when there's talk of infringement upon them. We even have a Bill of Rights within our Constitution. So simply put, like, we are ingrained in individualism. The idea that we can prosper as individuals, that we can grow through our freedoms and not have those being infringed upon is very a core value to us. And I'd like to say that neither social perspective is necessarily better than the other. Rather, they are different systems that do have their own consequences. So that argument of stability over freedom. So Japanese people may have more stability in the fact that they, statistically speaking, might be safer from gun violence as a result of these gun control laws. But here in the United States, we do have a little more freedom in that aspect. Saying that we do have the right to bear arms, and we do have all these other rights that kind of make us who we are as individuals. And then lastly, for this little section, the differences in policing. So again, keeping these social perspectives as a main theme, Japan's police force is quite different from the United States. And police in Japan have unlimited discretion when handing out gun permits to individuals, for example. I don't know if we touched upon this, but basically put, if the police in Japan don't want you to have a gun, you're not going to have a gun. Even if you do pass all the background checks and everything, if they just don't want you to have one, you're not going to have one. And their police force is more viewed as an occupying force, and I know that is kind of a intimidating term, but that's the only one I could really think of, rather than a policing device. So it's unlike the United States force that is more suited towards public service and the protection of citizens, but Japan's police force is more towards a body in which to enforce laws. They're not really there, I wouldn't say not there to not help people, but they're more suited towards, like, simply put, enforcing the law.
So for my part of facts, I focus on the mass shootings in the US and Japan. The events that I focused on were the Las Vegas shooting that occurred on October 1st and the 2014 gun deaths of 6 people in Japan. By using this comparison, we can see how these countries respond and how they go about to resolve the flaws in their gun laws. The US is well known for its right to own guns in the name of self-defense. However, when a case of mass shooting occurs, the perspective shifts. At times, when the US does acknowledge a gun problem, there is barely any restriction to gun regulations. As we know now, under current laws in Japan, citizens are banned from possessing, carrying, selling, and/or buying handguns and/or rifles, but also importing gun products. The nation's post-war gun regulations can be traced back to the Allied occupation in the 1940s, when the Japanese government was ordered to collect and hand over all guns and swords that were owned or kept by the members of the general public. This is according to the Justice Ministry's white paper. And the white paper means is it's typically with the purpose to advocate that certain position is the best way to go, or that a certain solution is best for a particular problem. Given the order by the Allied occupation forces, the government issued an ordinance in 1946 prohibiting citizens in principle from possessing guns or swords. The ordinance was then renewed in 1950 and later replaced with the Firearm and Sword Control Law in 1958. Now, we all know laws don't just appear from out of thin air. People, especially those in powerful positions like Congress, must have the conviction to do something.
However, the outcome is still the same. The lawmakers in Congress are stuck in debate on how to better gun control. You have officials, advocates such as Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, Senators Chris Murphy, Richard Blumenthal, and many more. These educated people, well versed in the law, who understand that the U.S. needs much more restrictive gun laws. Now, as a result, fortunately, there was some action taken by the GOP lawmakers. They banned the sale of bump stocks. However, that was just a temporary relief. Fun fact is that representatives such as the House Speaker, Paul Ryan, didn't even know what bump stock was. Bump stock is a device that enables a semi-automatic weapon to fire more rapidly, similar to an automatic weapon. It's comical how they had no comprehension of what this tool was or its dangerous capabilities, and yet it was still legal. And then you see the outcome like Las Vegas. Afterwards, there was a political poll that results in 64% of voters supporting stricter gun laws, 83% Democratic, and 49% Republican. States reinforced policies such as the 3-day waiting period and the Background Check Completion Act. The BCCA would prohibit dealers, even private ones, from transferring a firearm any time before a background check is completed. As I said before, this is occurring in individual states. They are the ones taking these actions, New Jersey, Minnesota, and so on. But Congress has yet to make a countrywide impact. In the case of Japan, the last major gun death was in 2014. Shigeo Sugawa, an advisor at the Technical Museum of the Japan Ground Self-Defense Force Ordnance, explains the lost properties are usually revised, usually after the occurrences of gun-related incidents, or the escalation of tensions among gangsters. The times where these gun deaths rise in the close likeness of the US is when there is an escalation of violence between rival Yakuza groups. But with each case, their laws become stricter and stricter. That greatly contributes to the title that Japan is the safest place to live, considering the one aspect being you won't die by gunshot in Japan. If we could just overcome these legislative challenges, we could get one step closer to Japan's level of safety. To reduce these gun-related tragedies, we would have to take some aspects of their gun laws, of their mentality to enforce them, then these legislations would be passed. The Firearm Regulation Authority in Japan is regulated by the Prefectural Public Safety Commission, while the US has the ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. There's also the NRA, the National Rifle Association, but they're mostly an interest group who happen to have political influence which they use to oppose most proposals to strengthen firearm regulations. In either case, there's still progress. Whether it's gradual or instant, there's always room for improvement. Whether it's Japan or the US, gun law should always be addressed with every intention that another gun-related death won't happen again. We know the history, we know the effects. All that matters now is learning from those mistakes. To give meaning once again to the law. For Japan, it's not that it's just a strict country regarding gun laws, but it's for the well-being of the people. This is in order to protect their citizens and to keep in mind what is in their best interests. It has been proven to be effective so far, whereas in the US, we are a democracy and it is our right to bear arms, it's just, it can't be seen as denying or taking away the rights of the people. In Japan, you can get a gun, it is possible, but it's very limited. Not completely denied, but limited in a very difficult process to get one. Japan may be the best example of gun control, but it isn't 100% bulletproof. Nevertheless, these two superpowers have some likeness when it comes to confronting gun control. And that's our presentation.